The fluorescent lights of the Cyber Command Operations Center at Fort Bragg hummed with a frequency that Major General Robert Hayes had long ago stopped hearing. What he could not ignore was the silence. 47 workstations, 47 high-resolution monitors, casting blue light across 47 empty chairs. 3 months ago, every single seat had been occupied by some of the most brilliant minds in American cyber warfare. Now, Silicon Valley paychecks had gutted his division like a fish. Hayes stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, studying the remaining 12 analysts who hunched over their keyboards with the exhausted posture of soldiers who knew they were losing a war they could not see. The enemy was not a foreign government. Not yet. The enemy was compensation packages, stock options, and the promise of a life where your greatest crisis was a server outage, not a potential attack on the nation's critical infrastructure. His aide, Captain Marcus Webb, appeared at his shoulder with a tablet displaying the morning's intelligence briefing. The news was not good. It was never good anymore. Sir, Cybercom flagged another intrusion attempt on the DoD satellite network. Third one this week. Same signature as before. We're calling it Golden Ratio. Hayes took the tablet without looking at Webb. His eyes remained fixed on the wall of monitors, showing real-time threat assessments across 17 time zones. Red dots bloomed like cancer cells across Eastern Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. Golden Ratio, Hayes repeated. That's the group linked to Russian GRU, correct? Affirmative, sir. FSB fingerprints all over the code, but they're using cutouts in Belarus and Kazakhstan. Attribution is solid but unprovable in any court that matters. Hayes handed back the tablet. And our response capability? Webb hesitated. That hesitation told Hayes everything he needed to know. Sir, we're down to 31% staffing in offensive operations. The analysts we have are good, but they're running on fumes. 18-hour shifts for 6 weeks straight. We've had 2 hospitalizations for exhaustion. 1 resignation this morning. Peterson took a job with Amazon's cloud security division. Triple his salary. Hayes closed his eyes for precisely 3 seconds. When he opened them, his jaw was set with the kind of determination that carried him through 32 years of military service, including 2 combat tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, where cyber warfare had been an afterthought, not the primary battlefield. What about the recruitment pipeline? That's why I'm here, sir. Webb scrolled through his tablet. HR flagged an unusual application. Came through the civilian hiring portal, not the traditional military channels. No degree, no prior government experience, no security clearance. Technically, she shouldn't have even made it past the automated filters. Then why am I hearing about her? Because she solved the entrance assessment in 4 minutes. Sir, the assessment that typically takes candidates with master's degrees in computer science 45 minutes to complete. And she got a perfect score. Hayes turned to face his aide for the first time. A perfect score. Yes, sir. First one in the history of the program. Background. Webb pulled up a file photo on his tablet. Hayes found himself looking at a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, and eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. She was not smiling. There was nothing hostile in her expression, just an absolute absence of performative pleasantness that most applicants projected. Sarah Chun, 22 years old, born and raised on a family farm outside of Kearney, Nebraska, graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA, but declined a full scholarship to MIT. Stayed home to help her parents run the farm after her father suffered a stroke. No college degree, no certifications, no professional experience in technology whatsoever. A farm girl, Hayes said. Yes, sir. Her hands have calluses. According to the intake interviewer, she showed up in jeans and work boots. Drove 14 hours straight from Nebraska in a 2003 pickup truck. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage and brilliance, and hit that notification bell so you never miss one. Now, let me show you what happened when Sarah Chun walked into Fort Bragg. Hayes was not a man who believed in miracles. He believed in training, discipline, and the systematic application of resources against problems. But he was also not a man who ignored anomalies. Anomalies, in his experience, were either threats or opportunities. There was rarely anything in between. Bring her in, he said. I'll interview her myself. The interview room was a windowless box on the third floor of Building 4, a nondescript structure that housed Cyber Command's administrative functions. The walls were painted the same institutional gray that the Army had been using since before Hayes was born. A metal table, 2 metal chairs, a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows across everything it touched. Sarah Chun sat in one of those chairs with her hands folded in her lap. She had been waiting for 47 minutes. Most candidates grew restless after 10. They checked their phones. They fidgeted. They asked the guards outside how much longer it would be. Sarah had not moved. Her breathing was slow and even. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the far wall. But Hayes could tell from the security camera feed that she was not zoning out. She was thinking, processing. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that required her complete attention. Hayes entered the room without announcement. He did not introduce himself. He did not shake her hand. He sat down across from her and placed a single manila folder on the table between them. Sarah Chun. Yes, sir. Her voice was calm. Not nervous. Not overly confident. Just calm. You drove 14 hours to apply for a job you have no qualifications for. I have the qualifications that matter, sir. Hayes leaned back in his chair. Is that so? And what qualifications would those be? I can see patterns that other people miss. I can hold complex systems in my head and manipulate them without external tools. I can solve problems that computers struggle with because I don't think like a computer. I think like the person who designed the problem. Hayes opened the folder. Inside was a printout of her entrance assessment results. Perfect score. For minutes and 12 seconds. This assessment was designed by a team of PhD mathematicians and computer scientists at Carnegie Mellon. It takes most qualified candidates the better part of an hour. You completed it in 4 minutes. Yes, sir. How? Sarah met his eyes for the first time. There was no arrogance in her gaze. No smugness. Just a simple certainty that Hayes found simultaneously unsettling and intriguing. The assessment tests pattern recognition, logical sequencing, and the ability to identify vulnerabilities in theoretical network architectures. Most candidates approach it linearly. They work through each section in order, building their understanding progressively. That's how they were taught. That's how computers process information. But the human brain doesn't work that way. At least mine doesn't. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I looked at the entire assessment as a single system. I identified the relationships between the sections, the ways that solving one problem would provide information relevant to others. I mapped those relationships in my head, prioritized the sections by information density, and worked through them in an order that maximized efficiency. The assessment isn't actually testing what you think it's testing, sir. It's testing whether candidates can see the assessment itself as a puzzle. Most people don't. They see it as a test. Hayes stared at her for a long moment. In 3 decades of military service, he had met exactly 2 people who thought the way this young woman appeared to think. One of them was currently serving a life sentence in federal prison for hacking into the Department of Defense. The other had died in a car accident 3 years ago, a loss that still haunted Hayes because that mind had been irreplaceable. You have no degree, Hayes said. No training. No experience. How did you learn to think like this? Sarah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. For the first time, Hayes saw something behind her calm exterior, a flicker of something that might have been pain, or might have been pride, or might have been both at once. I grew up on a farm, sir, a real farm, not a corporate operation with automated systems and hired consultants. A family farm where everything that breaks has to be fixed with whatever you have on hand, where you learn to predict weather patterns because your livelihood depends on it. Where you understand that every system, whether the tractor engine or irrigation network or a herd of cattle, has rhythms and relationships that you can learn to read if you pay attention. She leaned forward slightly. I've been solving complex systems my whole life, sir. I just never had a name for what I was doing. I never had anyone tell me that what came naturally to me was supposed to be hard. I learned to read patterns in crop rotations and livestock behavior and equipment maintenance schedules. The patterns in your computer systems aren't any different. They're just made of different materials. Hayes closed the folder. I have a scenario I'd like you to look at. It's classified. Before I can show it to you, you'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement that carries federal criminal penalties for violation. You'll also need to understand that if you fail this test, you will never work for the United States government in any capacity. Your name will be flagged in every federal database. You will not receive a second chance. Sarah did not hesitate. Show me the scenario, sir. The scenario room was 3 floors underground, accessible only through a biometric security checkpoint that required fingerprint, retinal, and voice confirmation. The room itself was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, designed to prevent any electronic signals from entering or leaving. No phones, no computers, no recording devices of any kind. What the room did contain was a single massive screen that dominated the far wall, currently displaying a schematic of the United States military satellite communication network. Red lines indicated known vulnerabilities. Blue lines indicated secure connections. Yellow lines indicated connections that were theoretically secure, but had not been tested under attack conditions. There was a lot of yellow. Hayes stood beside Sarah as she studied the schematic. He had not explained what she was looking at. He had not given her any context. He wanted to see what she would do with raw information. For the first 30 seconds, Sarah did not move. Her eyes tracked across the screen in a pattern that Hayes could not follow, jumping from node to node, connection to connection, in what appeared to be random order, but clearly was not. Then she spoke. This is your satellite communication network. Military grade. Probably AHF, advanced extremely high frequency constellation. You got redundancy built in, multiple pathways for critical communications, failover systems that should kick in automatically if any single node goes down. Hayes felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had not told her anything about the system. The schematic itself did not include any identifying labels. Continue. Your security team has been focusing on the wrong vulnerabilities. The red lines, the known vulnerabilities, those are obvious. Any competent adversary would know you've identified them and would avoid exploiting them directly. They're traps, essentially. Honeypots. The yellow lines are where you're actually exposed, but not because of technical weaknesses. She walked closer to the screen, tracing a path through the network with her finger. Here, and here, and here. These 3 nodes are your command and control pathways for drone operations in the Central Command Theater. They're technically secure. Your encryption is solid. Your authentication protocols are up to date. But they all route through a single ground station in Germany, and that ground station has a maintenance window every 72 hours when the backup power system cycles for testing. Hayes felt his stomach drop. How could you possibly know that? I don't know for certain, sir. I'm inferring it from the network topology. The way these connections are structured, there has to be a single point of consolidation somewhere in Western Europe. Germany is the most likely location based on existing NATO infrastructure. And every complex system has maintenance windows. Yours would be scheduled to minimize operational impact, which means overnight local time, which means predictable. She turned to face him. If I were attacking this network, I wouldn't try to break your encryption or overwhelm your bandwidth. I would wait for your maintenance window, inject a tiny piece of code into your backup power cycling system, and use that as a foothold to work my way into the main network. The attack wouldn't look like an attack. It would look like a routine maintenance glitch. By the time your analysts realized what was happening, I would already be inside. Hayes stood in absolute silence for a full 10 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Colonel Richardson, I need you in scenario room 3 immediately. Bring the satellite network assessment team. All of them. Now. He ended the call and looked at Sarah. That vulnerability you just described. We have had a team of 8 analysts working on identifying potential attack vectors for that network for the past 8 months. They have produced 17 reports. None of them identified what you just identified in under 60 seconds. Sarah's expression did not change. With respect, sir, your analysts are probably very good at what they do, but they've been trained to think like defenders. They look for weaknesses in their own systems. I'm thinking like an attacker. I'm looking for the path that makes the most sense if your goal is to cause maximum damage with minimum detection. Those are different perspectives, and they produce different results. The door to the scenario room opened. Colonel James Richardson entered, followed by 4 analysts in civilian clothes who looked like they had been pulled away from their coffee breaks. Richardson was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a permanently skeptical expression of someone who had spent too many years watching young hotshots fail to live up to their promise. He took one look at Sarah, her jeans, her work boots, her callous hands, and turned to Hayes with barely concealed contempt. "Sir, with respect, what is this?" Hayes pointed at the screen. "Miss Chun, please repeat your analysis for Colonel Richardson." Sarah turned back to the screen. She spoke for exactly 3 minutes. She did not pause. She did not hesitate. She walked the colonel and his analysts through the vulnerability step by step, explaining not just what the weakness was, but why their existing methodology had been blind to it. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the analysts, a young man with glasses and an MIT sweatshirt, raised his hand like a student in a classroom. That's actually correct. The ground station in Ramstein has a 72-hour maintenance cycle. I remember seeing it in a footnote in one of the infrastructure reports. I didn't think it was relevant. Richardson's face had gone pale. "Sir," he said to Hayes, his voice strained, "if she's right about this, we need to notify Cybercom immediately. This is a critical vulnerability." "I'm aware," Hayes said. "Miss Chun, you're hired. Colonel Richardson will process your paperwork and begin your security clearance investigation. In the meantime, you'll be working directly under my supervision on a provisional basis." Richardson's jaw dropped. "Sir, she has no clearance, no training, no. She has something better, Colonel. She has a mind that sees what our trained analysts cannot. And right now, that's exactly what we need." The first 3 weeks of Sarah Chen's tenure at Cyber Command were defined by conflict, not the kind that involved weapons or raised voices, the kind that simmered beneath the surface, poisoning every interaction with silent contempt and professional sabotage. Colonel Richardson assigned her a workstation in the corner of the operations center, as far from the action as physically possible. The other analysts avoided her in the hallways. They stopped conversations when she approached. They forgot to include her on critical email threads and accidentally scheduled meetings when she was in training sessions. Sarah noticed all of it. She said nothing. She simply worked. Her workstation became a temple of focus. While other analysts surrounded themselves with multiple monitors, ergonomic keyboards, and noise-canceling headphones, Sarah worked with a single screen and a yellow legal pad. She spent hours staring at network diagrams, making occasional notes in handwriting, so small it was nearly illegible. She asked questions that made senior analysts uncomfortable, not because the questions were hostile, but because they revealed assumptions that no one had thought to examine. "Why do we assume the attack will originate from outside network?" she asked during one briefing. "What if the adversary is already inside, waiting?" "Because our perimeter security is solid." Richardson snapped. "We would know if someone was inside." "Would we?" Sarah asked. "What does inside even mean when you're dealing with systems this complex? Your network has 17,000 individual nodes across 9 time zones. Your analysts monitor maybe 5% of total traffic. The rest is filtered by automated systems that flag anomalies based on predetermined patterns. If an adversary understood those patterns, they could move through your network indefinitely without triggering a single alert." Richardson's face reddened. "Miss Chun, I have 23 years of experience in cyber operations. I was conducting network penetration tests while you were learning to read. I'm not questioning your experience, sir. I'm questioning your assumptions. Those are different things." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut, but Hayes, watching from his position near the back, said nothing. He was conducting his own tests, watching to see how Sarah handled pressure, how she responded to hostility, whether she would bend or break. She did neither. She simply continued to work. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon, 23 days after Sarah's arrival. Hayes was in his office reviewing the latest intelligence assessments when Captain Webb burst through the door without knocking. "Sir, we have a situation. The operations center." "Now!" Hayes was on his feet and moving before Webb finished speaking. The operations center was chaos. Every screen was flashing red alerts. Analysts were shouting coordinates and threat assessments across the room. The massive wall display showed a map of the eastern United States, and Hayes felt his blood run cold when he saw what was happening. Red indicators were spreading across the map like a disease. Power grid monitoring stations, water treatment facilities, traffic control systems, hospital networks, all of them reporting simultaneous anomalies. "What are we looking at?" Hayes demanded. Richardson was at the Central Command console, his face slick with sweat. Coordinated attack, sir. We're seeing intrusion attempt to cross at least 47 critical infrastructure targets. They're coming in waves. As soon as we block one vector, 2 more open up. It's like nothing I've ever seen. Hayes scanned the room. His analysts were working frantically, but they were losing ground. Every time they closed one vulnerability, the attackers seemed to know exactly where to strike next. It was as if the enemy could read their minds. Then he saw Sarah. She was not at her workstation. She was standing in front of the main display, absolutely still, her eyes moving across the cascading alerts with that same pattern recognition focus he had seen in the scenario room. Her lips were moving slightly, as if she were counting. Miss John. She did not turn around. The attacks are following a Fibonacci sequence. Richardson looked up from his console. What? The Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Look at the timing intervals between the attack waves. Look at the geographic distribution. Look at the target prioritization. It's not random. It's mathematical. They're using a Fibonacci spiral to determine their attack pattern. Richardson shook his head. That's insane. That would require exactly what we're seeing. Sarah interrupted. The attackers aren't improvising. They planned this. They knew we would try to respond reactively, closing vulnerabilities as they appeared. So they designed an attack pattern that's predictable to them, but appears chaotic to us. Every time we respond to one attack, we're actually positioning ourselves for the next one. We're being manipulated. Hayes stepped closer to the display. Can you predict their next move? Sarah was already reaching for a marker. She drew directly on the screen. A series of curved lines that formed a spiral pattern over the map. The next major target will be here. She circled a point in Northern Virginia, the Dominion Energy Grid Control Center. They'll hit it in approximately 4 minutes and 30 seconds. But that's not the real target. That's misdirection. Then what's the real target? Sarah drew another circle, this one over Maryland, Fort Meade, the NSA campus. They're going to use the power grid attack as cover to inject malware into the NSA's own monitoring systems. If they succeed, they'll have a backdoor into every intelligence network we operate. They won't just be watching us. They'll be able to manipulate what we see. Hayes made a decision in less than 2 seconds. All resources to Fort Meade. Now, Richardson, I want every analyst focus on that facility. Miss Chun, you have tactical command. Richardson's eyes went wide. Sir, you can't be serious. I am deadly serious, Colonel. She saw what we missed. She leads a response. That's an order. Sarah moved to the Central Command console with the focused calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The other analysts watched her with a mixture of resentment and desperate hope. They did not want to believe that a farm girl with no degree could outperform them, but they also did not want to lose this fight. I need everyone to stop what they're doing and listen, Sarah said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that commanded attention. The attackers are using a distributed command structure. That's why they're so hard to track. No single point of origin, no central server, no obvious leadership node. They're designed to be resilient. She pulled up a network diagram on the main screen. But here's what they didn't anticipate. A distributed system is strong against targeted attacks, but it's weak against systemic disruption. If we can force them to centralize, to consolidate their command structure, we can take them down with a single strike. Richardson leaned forward. Despite himself, he was intrigued. How do you force a distributed system to centralize? You threaten the one thing that matters more to them than anonymity. Timing. Their attack depends on precise coordination. Every wave has to hit at exactly the right moment, or the whole pattern falls apart. If we can disrupt their timing, introduce latency into their communication channels, they'll have to fall back on a centralized coordination method. And when they do, we'll see it. Captain Webb appeared at Sarah's shoulder. We're seeing the power grid attack beginning. Dominion Energy is reporting anomalies across 14 substations. Ignore it, Sarah said. What? I said ignore it. It's a feint. The real attack is still being staged. If we redirect resources to the power grid, we'll be exactly where they want us. Focus everything on Fort Meade. Webb looked at Hayes. Hayes nodded. You heard her. Fort Meade only. Sarah began issuing commands with precision that belied her complete lack of formal training. She directed analysts to specific network nodes, ordered countermeasures deployed in sequences that seemed counterintuitive but proved devastatingly effective. She was not fighting the attackers. She was hurting them. Every move she made forced them to adjust, to adapt, to expend resources. And then, exactly as she had predicted, they centralized. There, Sarah pointed to a single IP address that had suddenly appeared in the traffic analysis. That's their command node. They just brought it online to coordinate the final phase of the attack. We have maybe 90 seconds before they realize they've been exposed and go dark again. What do? Webb asked. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. We don't just block them. We trace them. Every packet that flows to that node tells us something about their infrastructure. In 90 seconds, I can map their entire network. She worked in silence while the room held its breath. Analysts watched her screen, trying to follow what she was doing, but her methods were beyond anything they had been trained to understand. She was not using standard tools. She was not following standard procedures. She was doing something that looked like instinct, but was actually the product of a mind that had spent years learning to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Got them. Sarah leaned back from the console. On the main screen, a new diagram appeared, a complete map of the attacker's network infrastructure, including server locations in Belarus, Kazakhstan, and a Russian military facility outside of Moscow. The room erupted in cheers. But Sarah was not celebrating. Her eyes were still fixed on the screen, and her expression had shifted from focus to concern. This isn't over, she said quietly. Hayes pushed through the celebrating analysts. What do you mean? This attack was too sophisticated to be an end in itself. The resources they deployed, the precision of the timing. This was a proof of concept, a test run. They wanted to see how we would respond. And now they know. Yes, sir. They know our response capabilities. They know our timing. They know our decision-making patterns. The next attack will be designed specifically to exploit everything they learned today. Hayes absorbed this. How long do we have? Sarah studied the network map, her mind working through scenarios that would have taken a team of analysts days to process. If I were them, I would wait long enough for us to become complacent, long enough for the adrenaline to wear off and the lessons to be forgotten. 30 days, maybe 45. Then they'll hit us with everything they have. And what will they target? Sarah met his eyes. Something big enough to prove that today was a fluke. Something that will make everyone question whether we're actually capable of defending ourselves. She paused. The Eastern Power Grid. 120 million Americans without electricity. Hospitals without power. Traffic systems in chaos. Communications down. It will be the largest infrastructure attack in history. Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. You're certain? No, sir. I'm never certain. But I'm right. The next 6 weeks were the most intense of Sarah Chen's life. Major General Hayes assigned her a dedicated team of 5 analysts, the best he had left after Silicon Valley's raids on his talent pool. Richardson fought the decision but was overruled. The stakes were too high for institutional politics. Sarah worked 18-hour days. She slept on a cot in a supply closet near the operations center. She ate meals at her workstation without tasting them. Her entire being was focused on a single objective, mapping the capabilities and intentions of the threat group she had come to call Golden Ratio. The name had started as shorthand for their Fibonacci-based attack patterns, but had taken on a deeper meaning as Sarah learned more about them. These were not simple hackers, or even sophisticated criminals. They were strategic actors with nation-state backing and resources to match. Their code showed the fingerprints of formal training, probably Russian military cyber academies. Their operational security was nearly flawless. Nearly. Every system has weaknesses, Sarah told her team during a late-night briefing. Even the most secure ones. The question is whether we can find the weakness before they exploit ours. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, a second-generation Japanese-American with a background in signals intelligence, raised her hand. What are we looking for exactly? Patterns, Sarah said. Not in their code. They're too good for that. Patterns in their behavior. The way they make decisions. The timing of their communications. The targets they choose and the ones they avoid. Every organization has a culture, even criminal ones. If we can understand their culture, we can predict their actions. And once we predict their actions? Sarah smiled, a rare expression that transformed her face from stern focus to something almost warm. Then we set a trap. The trap took shape over the following weeks. Sarah's team identified 17 potential entry points into the Golden Ratio network, places where their operational security was slightly less perfect than elsewhere. Not vulnerabilities in the traditional sense, but opportunities for observation. Tiny gaps in her armor that might allow Sarah to see inside their decision-making process. She deployed monitoring tools so subtle that they were virtually undetectable. She analyzed communication patterns between Golden Ratio nodes, looking for the mathematical signatures that betrayed their organizational structure. She mapped their infrastructure not just geographically but temporally, understanding when they were active, when they were dormant, when they were likely to be making decisions. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand them. Golden Ratio was not a single organization. It was a network of networks. Russian state actors providing resources and direction, Belarusian technical specialists providing expertise, Kazakhstan-based server farms providing anonymity. The layers were designed to make attribution impossible, but they also created complexity. And complexity, Sarah knew, was the enemy of perfect security. 3 weeks into her investigation, she found what she was looking for. There's a timing gap, she told Hayes during a private briefing in his office. Every 72 hours, there's a 23-minute window when their command coordination drops to minimal levels. I think it's a shift change, different teams taking over different segments of their operation. During that window, their distributed command structure has to synchronize. And you can exploit that. I could do more than exploit it, sir. I can use it to predict their next major operation. If I'm right about the Eastern Power Grid attack, the planning and coordination for something that large will require multiple synchronization cycles, I should be able to see the preparation in their communication patterns before the attack happens. How far in advance? 4 to 6 hours minimum. Maybe as much as 12 if they're being careful. That's enough time to preposition defenses, alert critical infrastructure operators, and prepare our own countermeasures. Hayes leaned back in his chair. Miss Chun, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing sounds more like science fiction than intelligence analysis. Predicting an attack before it happens based on mathematical patterns in enemy communication timing? There isn't a single intelligence agency in the world that operates that way, which is exactly why it will work, sir. Hayes studied her for a long moment. This young woman, this farm girl from Nebraska with dirt under her fingernails and no degree to her name, had already proven herself in ways that should have been impossible. She had seen what experienced analysts missed. She had stopped an attack that could have compromised every intelligence network in the country. And she had done it all with nothing more than her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. What do you need? Access to the NSA's global communication monitoring systems. Real-time feeds, not archived data. I need to see their traffic as it happens. Hayes exhaled slowly. That's beyond my authorization. You're talking about the crown jewels of American intelligence. I know, sir, which is why you're going to need to go higher. The meeting at the Pentagon was scheduled for the following Thursday. The Joint Chiefs conference room was smaller than Sarah had imagined. She had expected something grand, a space that reflected the gravity of the decisions made within its walls. Instead, she found herself in a room that looked like a corporate boardroom, all dark wood and leather chairs, with portraits of former chairmen staring down from the walls. But the people in the room were anything but corporate. General Marcus Wade, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, sat at the head of the table. He was flanked by the service chiefs of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. The Director of National Intelligence sat opposite the Secretary of Defense. Major General Hayes occupied a seat near the end, looking like a man who had bet everything on a single card and was now waiting to see if he had won or lost. Sarah stood at the presentation screen. She had been given 15 minutes to make her case. In her entire life, she had never felt more exposed or more certain. General Wade, distinguished leaders, thank you for your time. I'm here to brief you on an imminent threat to the Eastern Power Grid and to request authorization for a preemptive operation against the threat actors responsible. Wade's expression was unreadable. Miss Chun, before you begin, I should tell you that several members of this council have serious reservations about this briefing. You have no military rank, no security clearance beyond provisional, and no formal intelligence training. Your presence in this room is highly irregular. I understand, sir. I'll let my analysis speak for itself. She began. For the next 12 minutes, Sarah walked the most powerful military leaders in the world through her findings. She explained the golden ratio attack pattern. She demonstrated the Fibonacci sequence in their operations. She mapped their organizational structure and identified the timing gap that would allow prediction of their next major attack. She showed them the evidence that pointed to the Eastern Power Grid as a target, the reconnaissance probes against specific substations, the malware variants designed to exploit particular SCADA systems, the communication patterns that indicated large-scale coordination. And then she showed them the solution. The attack is scheduled to begin in approximately 47 hours, Sarah said. But we're not going to wait for it. We're going to strike first. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward. Strike first? Miss Chun, you're talking about conducting offensive cyber operations against a nation-state adversary. That's an act of war. No, sir, it's an act of defense. We have solid attribution linking golden ratio to Russian GRU. We have evidence of imminent attack against critical American infrastructure. And we have a window of opportunity, the 23-minute timing gap, that will allow us to dismantle their entire operation before they can respond. Admiral Patricia Reeves, Chief of Naval Operations, spoke for the first time. You are proposing that we attack Russian military cyber infrastructure based on mathematical analysis performed by a 22-year-old farm girl with no formal training. With respect, Miss Chun, why should we believe you? Sarah met the Admiral's eyes. Because I've already stopped them once, ma'am. And because I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to let me prove it. She pulled up a new diagram on the screen. This is Golden Ratio's command infrastructure, as I've mapped it. 47 server nodes across 3 countries, coordinated through a central command structure that activates during their synchronization windows. If we strike during the next window, which occurs in 43 hours and 17 minutes, we can take down all 47 nodes simultaneously. They won't see it coming because they believe their timing is invisible to us. By the time they realize what's happening, they'll have no infrastructure left to conduct any operation, let alone one as complex as the Eastern Power Grid attack. General Wade was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the Director of National Intelligence. Is this possible? The DNI exchanged glances with several analysts in the room. Sir, her methodology is unconventional, but we've run her analysis through our own systems. The pattern recognition is solid. The timing correlation is real. As for whether we can successfully conduct the operation she's proposing, that's a tactical question, which I can answer, Sarah said. Sir, I'm not asking permission to conduct this operation from a command center. I'm asking permission to lead it myself. The room fell silent. The operation was authorized at 2,300 hours on a Wednesday evening. Sarah had exactly 18 hours to prepare the most significant offensive cyber operation in American history. No pressure. The operational center was a dedicated facility deep within the NSA campus at Fort Meade, a room so classified that even its existence was compartmented. Sarah's team of 5 had been augmented by 12 additional specialists from the NSA's Tailored Access Operations Unit and 7 more from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence. 24 of the most capable cyber operators in the American intelligence community, all under the tactical command of a young woman who had been on a tractor 3 months ago. Listen up, Sarah addressed the room. In 18 hours, we're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to take down a nation-state cyber operation in real time, using their own operational patterns against them. The attack window is 23 minutes. That's how long we have from initiation to completion. If we're not done in 23 minutes, they'll recognize what's happening and go dark. We'll never get another chance like this. She pulled up the operational map on the main screen. We're targeting 47 nodes across 3 countries. I've divided them into 7 cluster groups. Each cluster will be assigned to a 3-person team. You will receive your target assignments and attack protocols in 1 hour. Until then, I want everyone reviewing the network topology. Look for anything I might have missed. Look for secondary connections, backup systems, failover protocols. If there's something out there that could complicate the operation, I want to know about it before we go loud. A TEO specialist, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and the caffeinated intensity of someone who had not slept in days, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's our fallback if something goes wrong?" "There is no fallback," Sarah said. "We succeed or we don't. If we don't, Golden Ratio will accelerate their timeline and hit the Eastern power grid before we can reconstitute our operation. 120 million Americans will lose power. Hospitals will go dark. Water treatment plants will fail. People will die. That's our fallback." She let the words hang in the air. No more questions. Get to work. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and refinement. Sarah reviewed every aspect of the operation personally. She checked the attack vectors. She verified the timing calculations. She ran simulations that pushed her mental modeling capabilities to their absolute limits. And as she worked, she found herself thinking about the farm. It was strange. In the middle of the most important mission of her life, surrounded by technology that would have seemed like magic to her neighbors back in Nebraska, her mind kept returning to the fields she had worked since she was old enough to hold a hoe. The rhythms of planting and harvest, the patterns of weather and soil and growth, the way you learned to read the signs that told you when a storm was coming or when the crops were stressed or when equipment needed maintenance. This was no different. Different scale, different stakes, different materials. But the same fundamental truth. Every system had patterns, and if you could learn to read them, you could predict what was coming next. 18 minutes to window, Captain Webb announced. Sarah stood at the central command console. Her team was ready. The operation was staged. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Now there was only the execution. "Final check," she said. "Cluster teams, report status." 7 voices responded in sequence. Cluster Alpha ready. Cluster Bravo ready. Cluster Charlie ready. Cluster Delta ready. Cluster Echo ready. Cluster Foxtrot ready. Cluster Golf ready. Sarah took a deep breath. "We have one job tonight. Protect our country. Every keystroke, every command, every decision you make in the next 23 minutes matters. There's no room for hesitation and no room for error. But I believe in every single person in this room. You're the best at what you do. Prove it." She checked the countdown timer. "Window opens in 15 seconds. Stand by." The timer counted down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute. The first 40 seconds were chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. 7 teams executing simultaneous attacks against 47 targets across 3 time zones. Communication channels exploded with status reports, warning indicators, and real-time adjustments. Sarah stood at the center of the storm, her eyes moving across multiple screens, her mind tracking all 7 clusters simultaneously. She did not direct individual actions. Her team leads were capable enough for that. She watched patterns. She looked for the places where the operation was diverging from her predictions. She prepared to adapt. Cluster Alpha, primary target compromised, moving to secondary. Cluster Charlie, encountering resistance. Firewall adaptation in progress. Cluster Delta, first 3 nodes down, proceeding to phase 2. Sarah's attention snapped to Cluster Charlie. What kind of resistance? The team lead, a TEO specialist named Rodriguez, responded without looking up from his console. "They're running an automated defense protocol we haven't seen before. Adapts to our attack patterns in real time. Every time we try to push through, it shifts. Is it stopping you?" "No, ma'am. Just slowing us down. We're at about 60% efficiency." 60%. That meant Cluster Charlie would finish their targets in approximately 19 minutes instead of 12. Still within the window, but barely. And if any other cluster encountered similar resistance. "Clusters, listen up," Sarah announced. "Be aware that targets may have upgraded defenses since our last reconnaissance. If you encounter adaptive protocols, do not engage them directly. Route around. Find secondary pathways. Speed is more important than elegance right now." Acknowledgements came from all 7 clusters. "Time check," Webb called out. 7 minutes into window. 16 minutes remaining. Sarah pulled up the progress display. Across the 47 targets, 23 had been successfully compromised. Another 14 were in progress. 10 had not yet been touched. She ran the numbers in her head. At current pace, they would finish with approximately 3 minutes to spare. Tight but manageable. Then Cluster Foxtrot reported a problem. Ma'am, we've got an issue. Target F7 is showing activity we didn't anticipate. It looks like they're spinning up some kind of failover system. If it comes online before we're done, it could restore connectivity to targets we've already taken down. Sarah's blood ran cold. A failover system. Of course. They were too sophisticated not to have one. The question was whether she had accounted for it in her planning. She pulled up the network diagram for Cluster Foxtrot's targets. There, F7 was connected to a backup server cluster that she had identified during her initial mapping but had assessed as inactive. Clearly, it was not. Rodriguez, how long to compromise F7's failover system? Hard to say, ma'am. We're already stretched thin covering our primary targets. Best estimate. A pause. 6 minutes minimum. 6 minutes. They had 16 minutes of window remaining. If she redirected resources to handle the failover system, she would slow down the entire operation. They might not finish in time, but if she didn't handle the failover system, it might undo everything they had accomplished. Sarah made her decision in 3 seconds. Cluster Echo, I need you to pause your current operations and support Cluster Foxtrot on the failover system. Clusters Alpha and Bravo, increase pace on your remaining targets. We need to make up time. Ma'am, that's going to leave our Cluster Echo targets unfinished. I know. I'm going to handle them myself. The room went silent. Ma'am, you heard me. Transfer Cluster Echo's remaining targets to my console. All of them. I'll run them simultaneously while coordinating the overall operation. Webb stepped forward. Sarah, that's 8 targets. No one runs 8 simultaneous attacks. I do. She was already moving to her console, pulling up additional displays, configuring her attack protocols. 8 targets. 27 different connection points. Thousands of individual commands that would need to be executed in precise sequence. On a farm, you learn to track dozens of variables simultaneously. The weather, the soil conditions, the equipment status, the livestock health, the market prices, the delivery schedules. You learn to hold all of it in your head at once because there was no one else to do it for you. This was no different. Different scale. Same principle. Time check. 12 minutes remaining, ma'am. Sarah began her attack. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that seemed almost mechanical. But it was not mechanical. It was precise. Every keystroke was deliberate. Every command was calculated. She was not just typing. She was conducting, orchestrating 8 different operations simultaneously, shifting her attention between them in patterns that no one watching could follow. The room fell into a strange, tense silence. Sarah's team continued their work, but they found themselves stealing glances at her console. What they saw defied explanation. She was moving through network architectures like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance, exploiting gaps that should not have been visible, turning complex systems against themselves. Cluster Echo targets 1 through 4 compromised, she announced, her voice eerily calm. Time check. 8 minutes remaining. Cluster Foxtrot. Status on failover system? 60% complete, ma'am. Should make it with 2 minutes to spare. Good. All clusters. Push hard. We're in the home stretch. Sarah's fingers never stopped moving. Targets 5 and 6 fell. Then 7. Then 8. All Cluster Echo targets compromised. Returning oversight to full operation. She pulled up the master display. 45 of 47 targets were down. 2 remained, the last targets for Cluster Charlie, which was still fighting through the adaptive defense protocol. Cluster Charlie time? 2 minutes, ma'am. Maybe less. You have 90 seconds. Make them count. The countdown continued. Sarah watched the progress indicators with the intensity of a predator watching prey. Everything she had worked for, the analysis, the planning, the preparation, came down to these final seconds. Cluster Foxtrot, failover system neutralized. Cluster Charlie, target 1 down. Working on final target. Time, 45 seconds. Sarah held her breath. 30 seconds. Cluster Charlie status? Almost there. Defensive protocol is adapting faster than we can push. We need another few seconds. You don't have another few seconds. Find a way. 20 seconds. Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension. Trying alternative approach. If this doesn't work. 10 seconds. Sarah leaned forward. Her mind raced through possibilities. If they failed on this last target, Golden Ratio would have one node remaining. One node that could serve as a seed to rebuild the entire network. 5 seconds. Come on, someone whispered. Target compromised. The room erupted in cheers. Sarah did not celebrate. She was already pulling up the post-operation assessment, verifying that all 47 nodes were actually down, checking for any signs of resurrection or backup systems they might have missed. Everyone quiet down, she said. We're not done until I say we're done. The cheering subsided. Her team returned to their consoles, running their own verification protocols. For the next 15 minutes, they methodically confirmed what the initial reports had indicated. Golden Ratio's command infrastructure was destroyed. Not damaged, not disrupted. Destroyed. Total operation time. Webb announced. 18 minutes, 43 seconds. Just under the wire. Sarah finally allowed herself to exhale. Excellent work, everyone. We just did something that's never been done before. Remember this moment. Remember what we accomplished. Remember that we did it together. She turned to face her team. And remember that this is just the beginning. The infrastructure is down, but the people behind it are still out there. They'll rebuild. They'll adapt. They'll come back stronger, which means we have to be ready. The debrief lasted another 3 hours. Every aspect of the operation was reviewed, documented, and analyzed for lessons learned. Sarah answered questions from intelligence analysts, military officers, and civilian oversight officials. She explained her methodology, her decision-making, her improvisations. Through it all, she remained calm, focused, professional. The same qualities that had served her on the farm, tracking crop rotations and equipment maintenance schedules, now served her in the most classified room in the American intelligence community. When the debrief finally ended, Major General Hayes pulled her aside. Miss Chun, I've been in military service for 32 years. I've seen operations succeed and operations fail. I've watched careers rise and fall based on decisions made under pressure. In all that time, I have never seen anyone do what you did tonight. Sarah met his eyes. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm the one who should be thanking you. You just saved 120 million Americans from an attack they never would have seen coming. You did it with nothing but your mind and a keyboard. And you did it in 18 minutes. He paused. There's going to be recognition for this. Medals, commendations, probably a lot of uncomfortable attention. You should know what you're walking into. Sarah shook her head. With respect, sir, I'm not interested in medals. I'm interested in doing the work. There are more threats out there, more patterns to identify, more attacks to prevent. That's what matters. Hayes smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered features. You sound like someone who's found their calling. Maybe I have, sir. Maybe I just found what I was built for. The days that followed were a blur of briefings, interviews, and bureaucratic processing. Sarah's security clearance was upgraded to the highest levels. She was officially assigned to Cybercom's Advanced Threat Analysis Division, with direct reporting authority to General Hayes. Her provisional status became permanent. Colonel Richardson never apologized for his earlier treatment of her, but he also never challenged her authority again. When she spoke, he listened. When she made recommendations, he implemented them. He had seen what she was capable of, and whatever resentment he still harbored was outweighed by respect. 3 weeks after the Golden Ratio operation, Sarah received the summons to the Pentagon. This time, she was not presenting to the Joint Chiefs. She was being recognized by them. The ceremony was small, just the service chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, and a handful of senior officials. Sarah wore the same jeans and work boots she had worn to her original interview. No one commented. General Wade, the chairman, presented her with the Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest honor the Department of Defense could bestow on a non-military employee. Miss Chun, Wade said, your actions prevented what would have been the most devastating attack on American infrastructure in our nation's history. Your analytical capabilities exceed anything we have seen in a generation. and your courage under pressure sets an example that our uniformed service members would do well to follow." He handed her the medal. "But more than any of that, you reminded us of something important. The greatest weapon we possess is not our technology. It's not our equipment. It's not even our training. It's the human mind, the capacity to see patterns, to think creatively, to adapt and overcome. You embody that capacity more than anyone I have ever met." Sarah accepted the medal. She did not know what to say, so she said simply, "Thank you, sir. I'll keep working to deserve it." After the ceremony, as officials filed out and the room began to empty, Sarah found herself standing alone at a window overlooking the Pentagon's inner courtyard. The sky was beginning to lighten, dawn approaching after another sleepless night. Major General Hayes joined her at the window. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about my father. He's back in Nebraska, running the farm of my mother. He had a stroke 4 years ago. That's why I stayed home instead of going to college. Someone had to keep the operation running. Do they know what you've been doing? They know I work for the government. They know I'm doing something important. They don't know the details, and they never will, but I think they'd be proud." Hayes nodded. "They should be. What you've accomplished in 3 months will be the highlight of most careers. And you're just getting started." Sarah turned to face him. "Sir, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "The interview. The day you brought me in for the first time. You gave me that scenario, the satellite network vulnerability. You already knew I would see it, didn't you? You knew what I was capable of before I walked through the door." Hayes smiled. "I had a suspicion. Your entrance assessment results were unlike anything I'd ever seen. But suspicion isn't certainty. I needed to test you with something real, something that would show me who you actually were, not just what you could do on a standardized test. And if I had failed, you wouldn't have failed. I knew that the moment I looked at you. You have something that can't be taught, Miss Chun, something that can't be trained or developed. You have a mind that sees the world differently than the rest of us, a mind that finds patterns where others see only noise." He paused. "When I was younger, I believed that the military ran on hierarchy and discipline. I believed that following the rules was a path to success. I was wrong. The military runs on exceptional individuals, people who see what others miss, who think what others don't, who do what others can't. My job isn't to enforce conformity. My job is to find those individuals and give them room to operate. And you think I'm one of those individuals. I know you are, and I'm grateful that you found your way to us." The morning sun rose over the Pentagon, casting long shadows across the courtyard below. Sarah Chun, farm girl, pattern reader, the woman who had stopped a catastrophic attack with nothing but her mind, stood at the window and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the endless hours on the farm, learning to read the rhythms of nature and machinery, the years of watching, analyzing, predicting, developing a capability she hadn't known she possessed because no one had ever told her it was unusual. She thought about the doubters. Colonel Richardson, with his 23 years of experience and his immediate dismissal of a woman in jeans and work boots. The analysts who had avoided her in the hallways, certain that she could not possibly be what Hayes claimed. She thought about what it had taken to prove them wrong. Not anger, not resentment, not a desire to show them up. Just work. Patient, methodical, focused work. The same approach she had taken to every challenge on the farm. Understand the system. Identify the patterns, find the solution. The solution was rarely complicated. It was usually obvious once you learned to see it. The trick was learning to see. "Miss John." She turned. General Wade had approached quietly, his expression thoughtful. "General, I wanted to speak with you privately before you return to Fort Bragg. May I have a moment?" "Of course, sir." Wade moved to stand beside her at the window. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, said something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. "I've been in uniform for 41 years. I've commanded troops in combat. I've made decisions that determined whether people lived or died. I've briefed presidents and testified before Congress. And in all that time, I have learned one thing above all others." He turned to face her. "The people who make the greatest difference are rarely the ones with the most impressive credentials. They're the ones who see what others don't, who think differently, who have the courage to trust their own judgment, even when everyone around them says they're wrong. Sir, let me finish. What you did, identifying the golden ratio threat, predicting their attack pattern, leading the operation that dismantled their network. None of that was in your training. You don't have training. What you have is something more valuable, a mind that cannot be replicated, cannot be hacked, cannot be taught. He paused. The enemies we face are getting more sophisticated every day. They have resources, they have talent, they have time. What they don't have is you. And as long as you're willing to serve, that's our greatest strategic advantage. Sarah absorbed his words. She did not know how to respond to praise this direct, this unguarded, from someone this powerful. So she said the only thing that felt honest. I don't do this for the recognition, General. I do it because the patterns are there and someone needs to see them. Because if I can prevent an attack, I should, because the work matters. Wade nodded. I know. That's why you're exceptional. Most people want recognition. Most people want credit. You want results. That's rare. And that's why I'm going to make sure you have every resource you need to continue doing what you do. Thank you, sir. He extended his hand. She shook it. A farm girl and a 4-star general. Equals in a room where rank usually defined everything. Thank you, Miss Chun, for everything. The helicopter flight back to Fort Bragg took 47 minutes. Sarah spent most of it staring out the window, watching the Maryland countryside give way to Virginia, then North Carolina. She thought about her parents, alone on the farm she had left behind. She thought about the future, the threats that were still out there, the patterns she had yet to discover, the attacks she had yet to prevent. She thought about what it meant to find your purpose. For 22 years, she had not known what she was meant to do. She had worked the farm because her family needed her, not because it fulfilled her. She had read books and solved puzzles and watched systems operate, driven by a curiosity she could not explain to anyone around her. Now she knew the work she was doing mattered. The patterns she saw could save lives. The capability she possessed, the strange, inexplicable ability to hold complex systems in her mind and find the vulnerabilities others missed, was not a quirk or a curiosity. It was a gift, and gifts were meant to be used. When the helicopter landed at Fort Bragg, Captain Webb was waiting on the tarmac. Welcome back, ma'am. The team is assembled for your debrief. Good. We have a lot of work to do. Webb fell into step beside her as she walked toward the operations center. If you don't mind me asking, ma'am, what was it like, meeting with the Joint Chiefs, receiving that medal? Sarah considered the question. Honestly, it was strange. All those important people in that important room, talking about my accomplishments like they belonged to someone else. I kept thinking about my father, recovering from a stroke, learning to walk again through sheer determination, about my mother, keeping the farm running while caring for him, about the neighbors who showed up to help without being asked. Because that's what you do. She paused. Those are the real heroes. People who do hard things every day, without recognition, without medals, just because the work needs to be done. I'm just someone who happened to have a skill that turned out to be useful. Webb shook his head. With respect, ma'am, that's not giving yourself enough credit. You stopped an attack that would have affected 120 million people. You did it with no training, no experience, no formal education in any of this. You walked into a room full of people who had every reason to dismiss you, and you proved them wrong in 60 seconds. Sarah smiled slightly. Maybe, but the patterns were there. I just saw them. Anyone could have, if they knew how to look. But that's the point, ma'am. No one else didn't know how to look. Only you. 3 months later, Sarah Chin stood in the same operations center where her journey had begun. The room was busier now, new recruits filling the empty workstations, fresh faces bringing fresh energy to the fight. The talent drain that had threatened to cripple Cyber Command was reversing. Word had spread about what was happening at Fort Bragg, and people wanted to be part of it. Major General Hayes entered the room. His expression, as always, was difficult to read, but Sarah had learned to see the subtle signs of satisfaction that he tried to hide. Miss Chun, status report. 7 active threat monitoring operations in progress, sir. 3 new vulnerability assessments completed. 2 preemptive countermeasures deployed against emerging threat actors in Southeast Asia. The team is performing at peak efficiency. Hayes nodded. Outstanding. Walk with me. They left the operations center and moved the corridors of Building 4, past the scenario room where Sarah had first demonstrated her capabilities, past the interview room where Hayes had seen something in her that no one else had thought to look for. They emerged into the morning sunlight. Fort Bragg sprawled around them, barracks and training field and armories, the physical infrastructure of American military power. But the real war, they both knew, was fought in places you could not see, in networks and code, and the invisible currents of information that flowed around the world at the speed of light. I've been thinking about what you said. Hayes told her about the patterns, about how anyone could see them if they knew how to look. Sir, I don't believe it. Not because you're being modest, but because I spent 30 years watching people try to do what you do naturally. They can't. They can learn techniques and methodologies. They can study theories and frameworks. But they can't do what you do, hold an entire system in their mind and see how every piece connects. Sarah did not respond. She was watching a group of soldiers jogging past in formation, their boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. You know what I think? Hayes continued. I think there are two kinds of minds in this world. There are minds that process information, that take inputs, apply rules, and produce outputs. Those minds are valuable. They keep the world running. But there are also minds that perceive information differently, that see connections others don't, that find patterns where others see only noise. He turned to face her. Your mind is the second kind, and minds like yours are the rarest resource on Earth, rarer than oil, rarer than gold, rarer than any technology we could ever develop. Sir, I'm just doing my job. No, Miss Chun, you're doing something that no one else can do. And that's not modesty, that's fact. They walked in silence for a while longer. The sun continued to rise, burning off the morning mist, revealing the full scope of the base around them. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter lifted off with the characteristic thump of rotating blades. What's next for you? Hayes asked finally. Sarah considered the question. There's a new threat signature emerging from a group we're tracking in Eastern Europe, different from Golden Ratio, but similar methodology. I want to understand their patterns before they escalate. Of course you do. They reached a small garden area near the edge of the building complex, a rare concession to beauty in a place built for function. A bench sat beneath a row of pine trees, overlooking a stretch of grass that was immaculately maintained despite seeing almost no use. You know, Hayes said, settling onto the bench, when I first saw your application, I didn't believe it. A farm girl from Nebraska solving our entrance assessment in 4 minutes? It had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system, something. But you brought me in anyway. I brought you in because I've learned that the universe occasionally presents gifts that don't make sense. And when it does, only a fool ignores them. Sarah sat down beside him. Can I tell you something, sir? Something I've never told anyone. Of course, when I was growing up on the farm, I thought I was broken. Everyone around me saw the world one way, and I saw it differently. I saw the patterns in everything, the weather, the crops, the animals, the machinery. I couldn't turn it off. My teachers thought I was distracted. My classmates thought I was strange. Even my parents, who loved me more than anything, didn't understand why I spent hours staring at clouds or reading equipment manuals for machinery we didn't own. She paused. I never fit in. I never felt normal. I never felt like I belonged. And now, Sarah looked up at the sky, clear blue, streaked with the faint trails of aircraft high above. Now I know that I wasn't broken. I was built for this. Everything that made me different, everything that set me apart, was preparation for a purpose I couldn't have imagined. The patterns I saw in weather and the crops were the same patterns I now see in networks and code. The same mind that tracked livestock health and equipment maintenance now tracks threat actors and vulnerability assessments. She turned to face Hayes. I found my place, sir. I found where I belong. And that's worth more than any medal or recognition. Hayes nodded slowly. You know what the greatest weapon in any conflict is, Miss Chin? It's not firepower. It's not technology. It's not even strategy. What is it? It's the human capacity to adapt, to learn, to see what others miss and do what others can't. That capacity exists in every person to some degree, but in a few in people like you, it exists at a level that changes everything. He rose from the bench. Golden Ratio thought they were untouchable. They thought their patterns were invisible. They thought no one could predict their movements or understand their methods. They were wrong, because they never anticipated someone like you. He extended his hand. Thank you, Miss Chun, for proving that the greatest weapon America possesses was never our military might or our technological superiority. It was always our people. It was always minds like yours. Sarah shook his hand. Thank you for giving me the chance, sir. She turned and walked back toward the operations center, where her team was waiting, where new threats were emerging, where the work protecting her country continued without pause. Behind her, the sun climbed higher, burning bright above Fort Bragg. Ahead of her, patterns waited to be found. And Sarah Chun, farm girl, pattern reader, the woman who saw what others could not, was ready to find them.